Thanks for joining us on a road trip through rabbinic narrative. No agenda, just clarity. Welcome to a bonus episode of a road trip through rabbinic narrative. Since today is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, I wanted to share something that I noticed in this morning's slichos that I really never paid attention to before. After reviewing the different calamities and tragedies that occurred on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the Paitan then proceeds to make a request of Hashem. Twice in the Slicha, we make the same request. Transform the 17th of Tammuz into joy and gladness. Interestingly, we don't merely ask Hashem to bring us to a time where the fast days and the days of mourning will end. We actually ask him to transform the 17th of Tammuz into a day of joy and gladness. That struck me as a very strange request. Shouldn't we just request that the fast day should disappear? What do we mean that we're going to transform this into a day of celebration? To sharpen the question, I would say it like this. There's a big difference between asking that mourning should end and asking that mourning should become celebration. One is simply the removal of the pain, the removal of the sad state. The other is actual transformation. So how would the anniversary of destruction, of tragedy, become an occasion for joy or celebration? So you could just say, listen, this is a Paitan putting together a slicha, and there's an element of poetic license here. But I don't think that's a good enough answer, because it turns out that the Rambam uses a very similar language at the end of Hilchos Ta'aniyos. In Perek He, Halacha Yutes, the Rambam finishes off the halachos of fast days with the following halacha. He says, all of these tzomos, in the time of the Yula and the time of Mashiach, they will no longer be observed. And that makes sense. But then he adds, not only are they going to cease to be days of fasting, but they're going to be turned into days of Yom Tov and Sason and Simcha. And then he quotes the Navi Zechariah expressing the same idea. So this isn't just some poetic imagery of a Paitan. This is actually very precise language that the Rambam uses in his halacha, which is rooted in a pasuk from the Navi Zechariah. And so the question becomes even stronger. How does this actually work? What kind of a request are we making in the slicha? And what is it exactly that the Nevuah is conveying to us? So perhaps in order to get a better understanding of what this is, we may need to rethink what a fast day is. What is the tzom actually about? I think the premise of the question is that we're assuming that a fast day, that the tzom, is just a response to an event that occurred in the past. A national tragedy occurred. We mourn for it, we remember it, and part of our mourning and part of our commemoration of it is expressed through the fast day. But maybe that's just only on the surface. Maybe there's more there. Maybe the tzom isn't merely commemorating a historical tragedy. Maybe it's expressing an ongoing relationship. More specifically, an estranged relationship. What I'm referring to here is our relationship with Hashem, Bnei Yisrael's relationship with Hashem. We don't view the tragedies and the events of the Chorban as simply a break, a cessation in the relationship with Hashem. We view it more as a distance, as Richuk HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're distant from Hashem. And those are two very different ideas. When the relationship is estranged, when there's richuk, so the pain is real right now, because the relationship, despite the fact that all of these tragedies occurred, the relationship continues to exist. The pain is real precisely because the relationship still exists. And perhaps that's what the fast day is expressing. We're not just remembering the Chorban, remembering the tragedy and remembering the destruction, but we're expressing the fact that those events reflect a certain distance between us and Hashem, not a break, but a distance, but an estrangement. And despite that, the relationship still persists during this time of Galus. So if that's true, then I think we can understand what Hashem is saying in his Nevuah and the requests that we're making in our Slichos, which is that this whole time, throughout this entire history of exile, when we are commemorating the Chorban Habayis and we engage in Tzom, this whole time we were expressing the fact that we have a relationship with Hashem. Right now it's estranged, and we long to restore it to its full glory. So when that occurs, when the Geula comes in the time of Mashiach that the Rambam is referring to, we'll be able to look back at all of these days, at all of these fast days, and we'll be able to recognize how those fast days reflected the fact that we still maintained a relationship with Hashem, and now we have finally arrived at a time, we finally come to a time where we've restored the closeness, and we now have the kiruv. So that's what we mean by transformation. We're not going to pretend like those weren't days of mourning and those weren't days of fasting. But looking back from the perspective of Geula, we'll recognize that the fast days weren't merely just about mourning destruction, but they were expressing a relationship that endured through the entire Galus. And that's why the fast days don't disappear. They actually become transformed into days of celebration.